Hi, my name is Jasmine, I'm an illustrator, and today we're going to finish with coloring the medieval illustration that I've been working on. If you haven't seen part one, it's basically going over how I drew this piece. This particular illustration is going to be the cover page for the first chapter of my medieval comic, Girl Night. So this is the final drawing. The size of it is slightly too large for my scanner, so I had to scan it in chunks. The two images, I've imported them into Clip Studio Paint with the proper dimensions of what the final illustration is supposed to be at, so we're pretty much ready to jump in.
Alright, so now that we're inside Clip Studio Paint, it's time to clean up the line art. I have to line up both scans together, so it did take a little bit of time to make sure that nothing overlaps. Once it's pieced together, I do a contrast pass to bring out the line art, because in its raw state from the scanner, the line art is way too light. So what I do here is I go to edit and then tone correction, and I play around with the levels as well as with the contrast. It's more in the levels that I'm able to pull out the information from the line art, so that's where I mostly focus on pulling out all those little details. Once the contrast is properly pulled out, I change the color of the line art. I don't like line art that's too colored, because then it starts competing with the actual colors in the piece. But it is nice to have a little bit of color in the line art. So what I want to do here is change the line art color a slightish brown. The next thing to do is to clean up the line art. Because this is made by hand, there are always going to be blemishes. This can be a good thing and a bad thing. We want as many blemishes as possible. What we also want is to remove any parts that aren't desired. Let me explain. So all the little itty bits of texture that scanned through, we want that. But what we don't want is extra lines that shouldn't be there in the first place. And it's important to zoom in just to see if there's any scratches or little lines that were just accidents in there, you know. But other than that, we want to keep as much texture as possible. And the last thing to do when it comes to adjusting the line art before we can jump into coloring is to rearrange any element that might improve the flow of the composition. And taking a step back and looking at this piece a couple of hours later, I realized that the flowers could be positioned in a better manner. There's certain areas that are more empty, and some of the items are closer to the borders when they really shouldn't. They should all be positioned in the center of the frames. So I'm going to be moving some of these flowers and just play around with composition so that the eye can fully move around the middle illustration. Once the line art has been cleaned and the composition looks pretty good, it's time to color. So what I do is I create a new layer, put it on multiply, and start coloring with a low opacity brush. Clip Studio Paint has a ton of cool watercolor brushes, and you can also download more in their asset store. Because this is the first illustration in this comic, or at least it's the first official illustration, I'm still playing around with how the digital coloring is going to look like in terms of style. Is it going to be extremely sketchy? Is it going to be smooth with a more digital quality? Or is it going to have a flat coloring, which is what my usual illustration style is? I would like to try something different. I would like to do a more realistic style of painting, because again, we want to reference these medieval illuminations. That echoes a more gouache type of style. I don't think I'm going to go exactly down that route, because I have a line art that needs to show through. I don't want to delete the lines with the painting on top of it, so I have to find a middle ground where it's sort of watercolor, but some of the colors are still opaque enough that it gives it the painterly quality. I'm going to fast forward this painting process, but just keep in mind that I am still playing around with the transparency of the line art and some of these brushes. It's never too late to try new styles. If you feel like you want to try something new, go for it. Even if you are an established artist, you never know what can come out of trying something new, because that essence of your style, it'll always come through, whether you like it or not. But never be afraid to try new brushes or new types of painting styles, because you'll be surprised with what comes out. I'd say you'd probably get a positive result, so never be afraid to try new things. I'm not quite done coloring the middle illustration, but I definitely want to take a moment to adjust any colors here so that moving forward we can continue to push these colors and have a more harmonious blend. So what I'm doing here is a level correction first, because I want to make sure that the values are pushed far enough. I still struggle with pushing values to a deeper dark. My eye tends to settle onto the muddy middle, so it's good to take a few breaks in the coloring process to adjust the values and make sure that you are fully pushing them into their darks and to their lights. Looking at these medieval illuminations carefully, you can see that there is color variation in the frames. That type of shading is what's giving the illusion of 3D here. It's important to look at these for reference. So in between all these lines, I'm figuring out where to put these shades and highlights. Looking at a lot of medieval illustrations, there's this color palette that stands out a lot, in particular this blue color. Now, I don't know if that's because the materials that they had back then, they were pretty limited with their color palette, so the blue was a nice pop of color, but I've seen so many paintings now that blue color stands out, and I want to reference that color a lot in Girl Night. So as for the first illustration for the story, I thought it would be appropriate to use this color. For coloring the objects, I wasn't following a specific technique. I'm still in the experimenting phase, so I'm working off of the oil paint brush on Clip Studio Paint and just trying to figure out what looks both realistic and still consistent with my flat color style, I guess. What's really cool too is that Clip Studio Paint came out with a color mixing palette thing on the right. You just slap on color there, you can blend them together. It basically mimics a physical palette, so when I'm doing this more painterly style, it is very useful to pull color from that so it all stays consistent. For the ornamental C, I based the coloring and the design on a few references. I can't stress enough how important it is to use reference, so if there's anything that you can walk away learning from this video is use your references.
For the section where I'm going to put the title inside, I'm going to add another texture on top. Since there isn't going to be any actual color in the background, adding additional texture wouldn't hurt. The letter C, the ornamental C here, I knew that the colors were too muted and they were competing against the whole rest of the picture. So which hue would make it jump out the most? Because at the end of the day, we need to be able to read that this is a letter. Ooh, we are almost done. Before I do the final color adjustments on the whole piece, because it's important to take a step back and consider the shapes, the colors now that they're all put together. Before I do those edits, we're still missing the text in the second box. Now, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to draw that by hand because I don't really have Gothic or medieval fonts on the computer. I do have a few, but they're more for like titles, but not like text stuff. I'm not very coherent because I went to bed yet again late working on this thing. I just don't want to sleep or eat in the excitement of getting this project going. So let's try writing it by hand. Really bad handwriting, so I'm not even sure why I'm trying to attempt this, but it's worth a try. I have a book about calligraphy that I have used before for practice, so I'm going to flip it to the page of the exact type of font that I'm looking for and use that as a guide. The one I'm attempting is this one, Gothic Hand. Wish me luck. Not too long ago, I bought like a beginner's calligraphy pack. It's standard, you can find it at any art store. And it includes a set of calligraphy ends that have a flat point like this. See how it has like a lip? They're quite tricky to use, but we're gonna try. I'm gonna use the longest one. I have a very pretty brown ink, and if it's too brown for the illustration, I can always change the color on the computer. So let's try for brown. I don't have time to draw lines, so we're going to use a light box and some graph paper to provide a guide for my line work. All we have to write is the word chapter 1 and the duel. That's 4 words, I guess. That was really hard. Let's see if these pathetic letters are something I can work with. If not, I think I'll just go digital because I don't want this to take any more time. If I had all the time in the world, I would practice my calligraphy, in particular medieval calligraphy, and really nail it by hand, but we don't have that time. This is the first time I've ever scanned something inked like this, and I am astounded by the amount of ink in the letters is so varied. I'm honestly shocked at how pretty the ink came out. So I've kept the ink stuff, but I'm going to rearrange the letters and erase around them so that they look straight and pretty much manicured. We failed on the handwriting aspect, but I'm really glad that I still attempted this because I was able to get those beautiful shades of the ink. And we're done. It's hot, my neck is killing me, so I just got a beer. And then I'm gonna get another cup of coffee. Balance. I'm really happy with how this illustration came out. It is exactly how I imagined. And that is quite rare because usually all the illustrations I make, they sort of get to where I was going, but this is exactly what I wanted. Like I said, this is going to be the cover for chapter 1 of my medieval comic. If you are interested in getting to know more about that story and that project overall, I'm now posting the actual comic pages as well as tidbits and extra content. That's pretty much where I'm gonna be dumping everything from now on about that until I figure out exactly how I'm going to publish this. It's finally happening, you guys. This is no longer a project that just exists as a script. It's finally being fleshed out, and I am so excited to share this with everyone and eventually to self-publish this. If you have any questions about how I used Clip Studio Paint or just my technique in general or whatever, you're welcome to leave a comment. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do that because I will keep posting more art videos as well as just my usual writing and traveling content. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video.